very good morning, dear beloved community, and a very Merry Christmas to everyone. It's so wonderful that we can be together here in the monastery to celebrate this special day together, to come together as a community with those that we love the most, to be able to celebrate this special festival of Christmas. This morning we had the Mountain Spring version of Christmas by Carols by Candlelight. We were sitting in here in the meditation hall, singing Christmas carols and telling Christmas stories. And for some of us, we often think of Christmas as just a festival that came out of Christianity. But in fact, it's a much older festival, many thousands of years old. And in many cultures, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, they have a celebration at this time of the year, which in the Northern Hemisphere is one of the darkest times of the year. I was one year transiting through Iceland in November, and there was just a couple of hours, a few hours of daylight. I said to one of my dear friends who's Icelandic, I said, how do you deal with the darkness during this time of the year? Because only a few hours of daylight, 3 or 4 hours is what I'm remembering. I'm not sure if that's exactly right. And she said, you know, we light candles. We go and sit in the hot springs. We make it cozy. That's what we do. And she said also, and we take vitamin D. Is what she said also. So this festival that we call Christmas in the modern world, in the West, is actually a very old festival. Our ancestors noticed that, of course, by observing nature, that the days became shorter, the nights became longer. And then there was a time of what was the greatest darkness. And then slowly the light began to return. And after the coming of Jesus Christ, of Christianity, then this festival was adopted in the Christian church. But it's much older. So we have these traditions, and if you study the different traditions that occur around the time of the winter solstice, you see that regardless of which culture, which tradition they come from, they have a common theme. And that is that in the midst of the darkness, we turn towards the light. Even though the days are very, very short, in some places just a couple of hours, we recognize the presence of the light. We orient our life towards the energy of the light, and we welcome that in. So in the very darkest moments of our life, the darkest moment of the year, we touch the light. It's not in the absence of darkness that we touch the light, but right in the middle of it. And there's something to be said about that in terms of the spiritual journey as well, in terms of the spiritual path. For many of us, it's not only a time of the year. Can I change the microphone? This one, the battery is about to die. For many of us, it's not only a time of the year that we might experience as a very dark time, but it can also be a period of suffering, a period of difficulty. And often in our mind, we're caught in an either or an or mentality. There's either good or bad, or there's light or there's darkness, and so on, positive and negative. But to me, one of the great teachings of this season is that it is right in the middle of the darkness that we find the light. It's not in spite of it. We welcome the light in the middle of the darkness. We're not trying to get rid of the darkness, to push it away, but rather in that very dark moment, we illuminate what's around. So this season to me, this celebration of Christmas, is a reminder of the fundamental basis of our meditation practice. We're not trying to get rid of our suffering, our pain, our difficulties, but rather we cultivate this energy of mindful awareness and we illuminate the darkness from within. We illuminate the darkness from within. We come to an understanding of how it came about and what it has to teach us. In the story of the Buddha, and many of us know the story of the Buddha, Prince Siddhartha grew up sheltered in a palace. The story goes, his father wanted to protect the Prince Siddhartha from life, from the things we experience as normal life, old age, death, sickness, these kind of things. So he did his best so that anybody who had a gray hair was not allowed to be in the palace. Anybody who had a wrinkle was not able to be in the palace, and so on. Funnily enough, I was teaching, I had an opportunity to offer some practice in a retreat center that is a very well-known retreat place. And I had a session with the staff, and the staff were under a lot of stress because in that retreat center, believe it or not, they're so well known and such a leading a retreat center in terms of wellness, that anybody who has a wrinkle or has a little bit of gray hair, they can't be put in front of the public. So a little bit like that. So Prince Siddhartha was in this palace, and his father did his very best to protect him from what we would consider, at least at some level, as our normal experience of life, even as much as we try to deny it. Getting older, becoming ill, passing away, these kind of things. And it's said in the story of Prince Siddhartha that despite the king, his father's strongest and best attempts, that Prince Siddhartha went out of the gates of the palace. There were 4 gates of the palace, and he went out of each of the gates of the palace to see what real life was like. And so he stepped out of the palace gates and he saw something that he never saw before that really shocked him to his core. He saw someone who was old and decrepit, really old, and it shook him. It's said in the text that all the hairs on his body stood on end, and he retreated back into the palace. But then, not so long after that, he went out of another gate, and he saw someone incredibly ill. And the same thing happened. He was shocked, he was appalled. The hair stood up on his body, and he retreated back to the palace. Then after a little while of those kind of comforts again, he then went out of the palace gates a third time, and he saw someone dead. He saw a corpse. And the same thing happened. He was shocked, almost couldn't believe it, and retreated back to the palace. And the fourth time coming out, he saw a monastic. He saw a monk or a nun. And same thing happened. Shocked. And he retreated back to the palace. So he went out of all of those cardinal directions. And each time he did what we would do. or what we often do, our instinctive human reaction when we come into contact with a noble messenger, death, sickness, separation, a terrible situation. We're shocked, and our natural human instinct is to retreat back. To retreat back behind the walls of the palace that we've built for ourselves. These high walls that we've built around ourselves. And yet, when we come to Buddhist practice, what usually has happened is that despite our best attempts of retreating back into that palace, life has touched us. We've come into contact with a difficult situation. Someone's passed away. We've had a tragedy in our life, or so on, and we want to come to understand that. So we can learn from the life of the Buddha, and we can understand it on a much more fundamental level, an archetypal level, as our own journey. And that whenever something touches us, a death, sickness, a painful situation, a painful thought, a painful experience, we can either see that as an obstacle to get rid of, or we can come to an understanding of the deeper teaching in Buddhism that these are the things that are called noble messengers. The Buddha had his noble messengers. And in fact, one of the ancient commentators, about 1,500 years ago, said, in Buddhism, we don't talk about angels. This morning, we were singing the song, Angels We Have Heard on High. In Buddhism, we don't talk about angels. The closest equivalent to angels in Buddhism are these noble messengers. In Christianity and a little bit in Judaism, and definitely in Islam as well, one of the functions of an angel is to wake us up, to deliver a message. To deliver a message. So if you read the Jewish scriptures, the Islamic scriptures, and the Christian scriptures, this is one of the functions of angels. In Buddhism, it is our life itself. These messengers, these painful experiences that we have, that are there to deliver a message to us. And then it's our choice, a choice that we need to make over and over again, whether to retreat back behind the walls of the high palace where nothing can touch us, or so we think, or to do what the Prince Siddhartha did and to allow ourselves to be called forth. Not only once, but over and over again. This is what Buddhist practice is about. That when a difficult situation touches us, rather than retreating back inside the palace, we want to come to an understanding of that situation. We want to allow ourselves over and over again to be called forth. The Buddha had his noble messengers. Your noble messengers might be the same ones, or they might be different. But if we understand the Buddha's teaching, we know that each of us, if we shine the light of mindful awareness on these noble messengers of our own life, and we come to an understanding of those things, then that's the wisdom that we're called to bring to this world. That's the healing that we're called to bring to this world both outside and the world within. For me, this is one of the key messages of the Christmas season. And it's especially important for us as practitioners when we reflect on this truth to allow ourselves to be called forth by the circumstances of our life. You didn't grow up in the palace in the north of India like Prince Siddhartha. You're not from the north of India, most of you. You have your own unique circumstances. And so we need to look at the circumstances of our own life. We need to look at those circumstances and bring forth the kind of wisdom, the kind of healing, the kind of transformation that's possible within the circumstances of our own life. This is what we call spiritual maturity. It's the beginnings of spiritual maturity. When number one, we have confidence in our own capacity to come to understand how situations come to be. And number two, we stop all of our running around, trying to follow other people's paths of spiritual awakening and discover the reality of these things right within our own life. This is what the Buddha asked us to do. And this is the message of this season, to find the light right within our own experiences. Let's enjoy the sound of the bell. We often come to Buddhist practice because at some level we have this idea that we want to get rid of our suffering and move towards the light, however we see the light. And this is where, to me, the Buddha's teaching is really radical, because the Buddha, in the very first noble truth, reminds us that despite the way we tend to look at things, there's actually nothing wrong with suffering. There's nothing wrong with pain. It's the nature of things. It's the nature of things. It's the nature of our body to grow old, to be sick, and so on. But we want to deny this. It's our nature for us to be separated from those that we love. And yet we try to deny this. It's the nature for things to just kind of not always be absolutely perfect, just be a little bit off. That's the nature of things in this Saha world. This is what the Buddha reminded us in the first noble truth. This can be difficult to hear. It's almost instinctual that we treat our pain, our suffering, with aversion, with ill will. And this can be very subtle, a closing down of the heart, or a tendency to say anything but this. Anything but this. And if we're not careful, then, and we don't look at this tendency within ourselves, our whole spiritual life can be a life of running back into that palace, shutting down the gates, and never coming to any kind of understanding. And that would be a pity, because the Buddha said, you can wake up. Why don't you? That's what the Buddha said to us. And this is one of the invitations of this season. If we take care of it well, if we recognize our pain for what it is, which is a noble messenger, asking us to look more deeply, then we can understand that our pain is actually wisdom, not a pathway to wisdom. But if we take care of it well, our pain is wisdom itself. One of the great philosophers said this. By suffering comes wisdom. Many of us think that we can sit in our meditation and enlightenment will fall from the sky And it will be such a wonderful thing, transcending, going above this everyday kind of situation. When in fact the opposite is where real spirituality is. Not transcendence, but transformation. When we treat our pain with ill will, when we treat it with aversion, that it's then that it becomes suffering. If we're able to treat it with love, with curiosity and with loving kindness, then it can become that noble messenger. It can become wisdom rather than an obstacle. The very first step on the path of true healing to me is to be able to generate an unconditional friendship to all parts of our experience, to be able to welcome all in. In the very last verse of a very famous sutra, which is the Discourse on the 8 Realizations of Great Beings, was the second sutra that was translated into Chinese by Master An Shikao, An Te Cao in Vietnamese. A bodhisattva is considered to be someone who's able to befriend all things, including suffering. A bodhisattva is someone, a practitioner is someone who's able to befriend all things, including suffering. I think in this season, it's important for us to ask ourselves, as I've kind of mentioned a few times over the past year, to perhaps reflect on what we mean by, or what we understand transformation of suffering to be. If we understand the path of Buddhist practice or meditation as about transforming suffering, what does it mean? What does it mean to you? And not only suffering with a capital S, but what's your suffering? Your suffering might be different from my suffering. What is ill-being in you might be different from what's ill-being in me. So looking at our own situation, recognizing our suffering, seeing it as an invitation to go a little bit more deeply, then the next question is, what do I mean? What do I understand when I say my practice is about transforming suffering? Transforming my suffering. Does it mean that let's say you suffer because you have a lot of physical pain. And we understand the Buddha as somebody who has transformed his suffering. One of the very fundamental understandings of the Buddhist path. Does that mean then that the Buddha never had any physical pain? Even somebody who has only read a couple of texts will know that that is not the case. The Buddha had quite a significant amount of physical pain. And especially as he was getting older, suffered a number of complaints that would be quite usual for us to hear as people become old. Teeth falling out, sight getting weaker, and so on. Pain, physical pain in the joints. This is the Buddha was sharing with his attendant you can read in the sutras. So it's not like that. Does it mean that we never have any emotions? We never get sad. We never become depressed. We never become jealous. Is that what transforming suffering means? Is that something that's possible as a human being? No. Does it mean that we experience being separated from those that we love? Does it mean that we are the person who's never going to die? No. Rather than getting rid of something, these what we call marks of existence, these are the fundamental marks of existence. Transforming our situation is a radical shift in perspective. And this is where in a lot of ways, Buddhist practice is a bit like a reality check. The Buddha is saying, you know what, there's nothing wrong with these things. It's our way of looking at them. It's our way of avoiding them. But let's look with clear eyes and an open heart at our real situation and bring forth the wisdom from within our own life. This holiday season is a lot about giving and receiving. One of the beautiful practices that I love so much in the Christmas season is that tradition of not saying, I want this, I want that for Christmas, but rather, if you're going to give a gift to another person, to spend some time to really come to an understanding of that person and to surprise them. That's the kind of the real Christmas spirit, rather than writing down, I want this, I want that, I want da. But rather we say, Kan, like let's say I pick Kan's name, or I want to give Kan a gift. She's this is her nature, this is what she likes, and so on. And then I'm able to really offer something that will bring Kan joy. This is the how we normally practice it. And so we have this aspect of giving and receiving. If you want to give somebody something, first of all, there has to be a giver. There has to be a gift. There has to be somebody to receive it, right? And often many of us think that if we met the Buddha, if we were lucky enough to meet the Buddha, if only we could travel back 2,600 years in time and be there in the north of India or in southern Nepal with the Buddha, spend a day or two or maybe a week with the Buddha and the Sangha, then I would receive teachings on real meditation. It's then I would really get the teachings of meditation. But if you are a student of the texts, you know actually that it was quite rare that when people came to the Buddha, whether they were monastic or lay, that they would receive teachings on what we would tend to think of as meditation. This just didn't happen. We have this warped view. If you study the texts, you know that the Buddha always taught in a graduated way, and there were two formulations that the Buddha always taught. But most of the time, when people came to the Buddha and said, please teach me how to practice my spirituality, the Buddha didn't say that you need to sit for half an hour every morning and do walking meditation and sit for another half an hour in the evening, as many of us would think our spiritual life is, and please chant the sutras. The Buddha did not say those words. The Buddha always offered this graduated teaching. And most of the time, what did he begin with? He began with generosity. When people came to the Buddha and said, please teach me, what's the fundamental practice? The Buddha taught about generosity, dana. This is what the Buddha almost always began his teachings with. Nowadays, especially in our modern society, we want to focus on what we call meditation, which is more like mental development, bhavana in the original terms. But this was only ever taught later. The Buddha said the fundamental characteristic of any practitioner, something that we need to develop deeply in order for our spirituality to have fruit, is this practice of generosity. So often when we think of our spiritual practice, if I say, what's your spiritual practice? Most of us will say, well, I do sitting meditation, I do walking meditation, and so on. This is fantastic. But the Buddha usually taught dana, generosity, first. And very few of us will answer this way. I practice to be generous. So the Christmas season is a nice reminder of this fundamental teaching of the Buddha. of the three foundational aspects of our spiritual path, if you look at the incense burner on the shrine, you see it has three legs. So our spiritual practice always has three fundamental foundations. So of the three fundamental foundations, generosity is the first. The other two are ethics, which is our way of relating to the world around and taking care of ourselves. And then the third is bhavana, mental development or meditation. Meditation is not really a great way to translate the word bhavana, because sometimes in English meditation can mean just that kind of energy of lying back and thinking about Mother England, this kind of energy, but it's an active process in the Buddhist tradition. It's an active process of developing attention. So meditation was always taught within this context that the Buddha emphasized in his teaching of what? If we look at generosity and we look at mindfulness trainings or ethics, what is this all about? It's about how we relate to ourselves and the world around. The meditation or spiritual practice is not about this holy trinity of I, me, and my, but rather the fundamental characteristics of the spiritual path in practicing generosity and practicing mindfulness trainings is all about how do I relate to the world around. So we can see even in this way that the Buddha always taught in a very engaged way, that our spirituality is not something that just happens in the meditation hall, but it's how we open a door. It's how we speak to another person rather than treating them like an object. It's how we behave towards ourselves. How we behave to these situations in our life that we find painful, that we don't want, as well as how we behave towards those things that we do want, those people that we find or those situations that we find pleasant. Dana, generosity in the Buddhist path, is considered to be a really great, one of the most profound qualities that we can generate. It's considered to be the very beginning and the end of the path. It's also considered to be the first of the 10 paramitas, the crossings over. Sometimes the Buddhist path is described as being a practice of crossing over. And the Buddha described us as standing on the shore of a great river that's flowing. Not so long ago, our monastics were on the Ganges River in India. That's a very great river, and the water is flowing quite strongly in that river. So it's like standing on the banks of that kind of river and wanting to cross over to the other shore. And so the Buddha advised us as practitioners to, rather than waiting for somebody else to do it, but for each of us to build ourselves a raft and then cross over to the other shore. So to build ourselves a raft of one of those qualities of that raft is generosity. Another one is mindfulness trainings, ethics. Another one is mindfulness. Another one that sometimes we forget is joy. Another one is ease, and so on. Our raft is made up of these qualities. If somebody says to you, what is awakening? These are the factors of awakening. These qualities of joy, ease, generosity, and so on. That's what awakening is. So we cultivate these qualities, and they are the raft that help us to cross over these floods that we experience in our life when we feel like we're thrashing around, when we're drowning. We don't know which way is up, which way is down. Many years ago, our brothers in Upper Hamlet in Plum Village, we went on a canoeing trip. Once a year, we used to have a chance for the brothers to go out and have a little trip somewhere. So we had a 2-day journey We were driven up the Vézère river in the south of France, and we got into canoes, and then we canoed down halfway one day, and we stayed overnight in a camping spot, and then continued on down the Dordogne the next day, and that was our journey. So at one point on this journey, I was in the canoe with another brother, and he said, Thầy Phap Hai. I was maybe 23 at the time. Oh, Thầy Phap Hai, you've been paddling so hard. Why don't you lay back and take a rest? I'll paddle now. So I laid back. I put my straw hat on my face, and I was laying back, just enjoying being paddled along the Dordogne River. And then we came to an area of rapids in the river. The rapids were so strong. And all of a sudden, I was thrown out of the canoe. I was thrown out of the canoe down into the water. I was completely lost. I didn't know which way was up, which way was down. I kept getting spun around in the rapids like that. And I had this moment. It was a very short moment, but I had this moment of panic. But then my mindfulness kicked in. And I did what we normally don't want to do in those kind of situations. I completely relaxed. Usually, which way is up? Which way? Oh, I've got to get out of here. No, I completely relaxed. And not so long after that, just by relaxing, of going with the flow for a little while, I was able to break the surface of the water and take a breath. Our instinctual reaction is to tense up, to fight up, and in that way we can make the situation a lot worse. Rather than trusting the wisdom of our own bodies, of relaxing, of coming to an understanding of the way the currents are going, which can help us to break the surface. And this journey of crossing over, the journey of the paramitas, is not a one-time journey. But it's a journey that we need to take over and over again in our life. Sometimes hundreds of times a day. There was a short video that a friend sent to me. It was a very funny video of a woman. She was sitting in the car and she said, "It's 11 a.m. I got up this morning. I was going to be kind. I was going to be compassionate. Today was going to be the day that it was just going to be a fantastic day. I was hydrated. I was ready to go. It's 11 a.m. I've already had to recommit my life to Jesus 3 times." You know, this kind of thing. Sometimes we have to take this journey of crossing over many hundreds of times a day. And then something interesting happens. We take this journey of crossing over, this journey of 1,000,000 lifetimes or of a single moment. It's also possible in a single moment to cross over. And then we arrive to the other shore, whatever that other shore might be for us in this moment. We pull ourselves up on the shore, and then we drag up that raft. And after a little while, we stand up. We look around. And something strange happens. We see that we're exactly where we were before. We're standing exactly at the same point that we departed on our journey from, but everything has changed. Everything has changed. In order to truly embark on this journey of transformation, the Buddha reminded us that we have to practice generosity, that not only as a physical thing, but also in all aspects of our spiritual life. How is my practice of meditation a gift to me, a gift to others? How is my practice of mindfulness trainings a gift to myself or others, and so on? Generosity softens the ground of our mind and heart, and it's said in Buddhist psychology that if we are fearful, if we want to transform the seed or the root of fear in our heart, in our mind, then generosity is the way to do it. Fear comes from the root of ill will towards others or towards ourselves. Ill will manifests as a closing down of our mind and heart. A closing down of our heart towards another person, a situation, or towards ourselves. The Buddha said that there are 3 kinds of gifts. And maybe we can bear this in mind. This afternoon we'll have our traditional gift exchange game. It takes a year to recover from this game. It's very fun. But we can think about this afternoon. There are 3 kinds of gifts. These are traditionally described in the texts. So the first is material gifts, which is most likely what we'll be giving, one aspect of what we'll be giving this afternoon. A physical thing. A material gift can be food, it can be a toy, it could be a book, it could be anything like that. That's a material gift. This is the first type of gift. The second type of gift is the gift of the Dharma, the gift of practice. We monks and nuns really don't have much at all. We have 3 robes and a bowl. Usually we're allowed to have a razor, a water filter, so on. There are a list of things in the Buddhist tradition that we're able to consider as ours, not counting our own karma, as ours, physical things. But everything else, it doesn't belong to us. So we don't really have much that we can physically give. So we give the Dharma. This is one gift. But also that's something that we can each give to other people, some concrete methods of practice. But even more than being a walking encyclopedia, one way of giving the Dharma is to offer that energy of solidity, energy of presence. That we don't need to talk about the Dharma or things like that. Rather, we can just offer that. The third is the gift of non-fear. And in fact, the Buddha, we talk about what's the gift of non-fear. The Buddha was always a very concrete and practical teacher. So in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha described 5 ancient gifts which have been held by the ancients, the wise ones, to be very important. These 5 ancient treasures. And these 5 great gifts or ancient treasures are the 5 mindfulness trainings. When we practice the 5 mindfulness trainings, we're offering fearlessness, love, and kindness to everybody and also to ourselves. If we can give freedom from fear to another person through our way of behaving and speaking, that's a great gift. So also, in terms of ethics, the mindfulness trainings, whether they're the 5 mindfulness trainings, the 14, whether they are the precepts of a monk or a nun, the purpose of mindfulness trainings or ethics, our behavior towards others, looking at how we behave towards others and to ourselves, is to transform the root of ill will in ourselves so that we don't behave in ways that harm ourselves or others. Mindfulness trainings or ethics in Buddhism are not there to be used like a weapon. You know, if we see something, then we say, "You didn't do this." It's not the way, because that would be really ill will. But rather, slowly we become more and more sensitive to our behavior, to our way of thinking, our way of speaking. And really reflect on whether we're offering non-fear, whether we're offering kindness, we're offering goodwill. So that gift of non-fear, that gift of mindfulness trainings is considered to be one of the highest gifts that we can offer. Of these 3 forms, traditional forms of gifts, the gift of Dharma, the gift of non-fear, the gift of material things, I like to add a fourth, which is only implied in the text. The fourth to me is the willingness to receive. The willingness to receive. This is also a form of giving, a form of generosity. Because we give the other person an opportunity to be able to practice generosity. You know, it's a lot easier to give than to receive. It's a lot easier. There's a funny story I'm just remembering of a time that I was Tay's attendant, our teacher Tay's attendant. And we were having formal lunch. So normally in the monastery, formal lunch is a time when sometimes people want to make offerings to the monastic sangha. And we had this formal lunch and people made offerings to the sangha, and I was sitting next to Tay, so I was trying to hand him some toothpicks after the meal. Now, for those of us of Vietnamese origin, you'll know that we can't really hand we shouldn't. I was so young, I was a young novice, I didn't understand this cultural aspect. We can't hand toothpicks to your teacher or your superior, these kind of things. It's like in the West, when if you're good friends with somebody, we will never give a knife and we'll never give scissors. You have to buy that. Like if you want to give somebody scissors, then you say, I'll give it to you, but give me $1, this kind of thing, because we're afraid that it will cut the friendship if we give a gift like that. That is our tradition. So in Vietnam, there's a tradition of we will not give toothpicks to our superiors or to our teacher, because you'll pick a fault with that person, right? You'll start to pick the fault. So anyway, Tay was trying to not take these toothpicks. Tay was trying to look the other way and drink the tea, everything, while I was trying to hand him the toothpicks. And then I got increasingly, I wouldn't say frantic, but I was more emphatic with my offering of the toothpicks. So finally, Tay just said, put it here, put it here. So I was confused. Later on, we came back to Tay's hut, and then I was carrying the offering that was given to me, which was soap and toothpaste that were given to the monastics in the offering. And I was already feeling a little bit uncomfortable, because in Australia, there's some gifts we will never give at Christmas or birthdays. We will not give soap. We will not give deodorant. We will not give toothpaste. On my birthday a couple of weeks ago, somebody gave me soap. And so I had to breathe, because that person was not of Australian origin. So they didn't know. If you give soap to the person, it means they're dirty. Or if you give deodorant, you smell. If toothpaste, these kind of personal hygiene items we shouldn't give, like for this stuff. So anyway, I was a little bit uncomfortable receiving this, and so we were sitting together, and Tay was explaining to me about the toothpick situation, that you can't give toothpicks like to your teacher in Vietnamese culture because you'll pick a fault. I said, Tay, I know exactly what you mean. Every time we have formal lunch or somebody wants to make an offering to the Sangha, they offer razors, they offer soap, they offer toothpaste and these things. And I told him in Australia, we can't do that. It's like it means like this. And Tay laughed so much. And he said, sometimes we just have to be willing to receive. You just have to be willing to receive. So this is also one important practice. And this is not only in terms of physical gifts, but are we willing to receive that other person? Let's say that person that we find annoying, we find irritating. Are we willing to open a space in our heart to be able to receive that person? Maybe in their life, very few people have done that for that person. That can be a form of generosity. Are we willing to receive the gift of the deodorant and soap, the gift of the toothpicks, as an act of kindness to that person? When we're in a situation of receiving, in some ways it's a much more vulnerable position. It can feel like, we like to be somebody usually who's giving, this kind of dynamic. I'm giving something to you. But if we understand that the gift of receiving is also a gift, that's already a big transformation. That's already a big step. A gift is considered beautiful, and this can be something we can hold in our mind as we're playing this game this afternoon. A gift is considered beautiful if it has 3 qualities on the part of the person that's offering the gift. The first is the person giving needs to be delighted at the thought of giving before giving the gift. Let's say we pick Sister Tunmin's name out of the hat and we're preparing a gift for Sister Tunmin. We need to be delighted when we're thinking of that chance to give a gift to Sister Tunmin. We delighted before, not like, oh, I picked Sister Tunmin's name. Let me find something cheap from the dollar store. This kind of thing. But delighted. It's not about the value, but about this kind of feeling of now I have the opportunity to be able to repay the kindness of Sister Tunmin. She's done so much for me. Like that. So we think about that person. We treasure this opportunity to do something kind for that person. So before giving the gift, you're delighted. And then when you give the gift to the person, you're delighted. You're so happy at the time that person receives the gift. This sense of delight. And then what's next? It's easy to understand. You're delighted after the gift. Sometimes we give, but then later on we feel a little bit regret. Maybe some people wrapped something up to put under the tree this morning. They're already feeling some regret. A gift is considered beautiful if on the part of the person giving the gift, they have these 3 qualities of mind. Delighted before, delighted during, at this chance, and delighted after. Every time you think about that gift, and we're using the example of Christmas gifts here, but it can be anything, the gift of our presence, for example. But we think back to all those times in our life when we've been generous, and it's one of those qualities that can gladden our mind. So today is just like a little dry run for this daily practice. Delighted before, delighted during, and then afterwards, when we think back to those times we've been generous, we're delighted, not like, why did I do that? Oh my God, I went too far. But actually we're delighted. Generosity helps us to transform our suffering in 3 ways. First, when we decide to give something of our own to somebody else, it's said that we reduce our clinging to the object. We're not defining ourselves or our happiness by it. In some way, when we give a gift to another person, we practice to completely let go. Completely let go. One of our brothers, he's from England, and he tells the funny story of before he was a monastic, he used to go every year to celebrate Christmas with his mother in their house, and she had a drawer where she would put all of these gifts that she received that she didn't want, and she would re-gift to other people. And so one year he decided to look in the drawer, and half of the drawer was filled with gifts that he'd given to her for her to give away to another person. So he laughed about it, and this is also one element of that. We're not defining ourselves or our happiness by that thing. The second is it creates a lot of positive potential. I like rather than translating punya as merit, I like the translation positive potential. Creates kind of a flow of positive potential in our life. It's said in the Buddhist text that if we practice generosity, it creates favorable conditions around ourselves. And that more favorable conditions come. When we first came to Mountain Spring, the monastics had a couple of $100. I didn't even have a shrine. We had a cardboard box and a small Buddha on there. That was our shrine, a cardboard box. I had nothing to offer on the shrine, so I simply offered water. That's all I had to offer on the shrine. a few bowls of water. That was quite abundant here because it was raining all the time. So I was offering water. Then slowly, just through that practice, we developed the practice here of whatever we receive, we share. So we don't hold on to it, whether it's physical things or Dharma and so on. Such a temptation when somebody would give us something in that situation that was quite challenging. We hold on to it. Oh, I've got to have this, so I'm going to be secure. But we had a practice here. If somebody gave us, at that time, they would give us, 2 oranges. We would give one to Mountain of Joy, which was the food distribution up here on the mountain. So we always, somebody give us 2 blocks of tofu, we give 1 away, myself and Brother Tenzin. That's how we practice. Because it's so easy to hold on to things. And in that way, we become more and more fearful, more and more closed down. But through giving, and from my experience, we create this flow of positive potential in our life. In the Samyutta Nikaya, in one of the most ancient Buddhist texts, it says, what the miser fears that keeps him from giving, what the person who's really afraid of, that keeps them from giving, is actually the very danger that comes to them if they don't give. That's what the Buddha said when he was teaching on generosity in the Samyutta Nikaya. And then the third quality is that generosity, this practice of giving, will help us to develop those 3 qualities of mindfulness, of concentration and insight right in the here and now. These practices, these elements will enter our lives in an embodied way. The Buddha said in the Itivuttaka, which is the inspired utterances of the Buddha, he said, if beings knew as I knew the results of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given, even if it was their last bite, their last mouthful. They would not eat without having shared, if there were a being to receive their gift. But because beings do not know as I know the results of giving and sharing, they eat without having given. Buddha once explained that it was even an act that created a lot of positive potential. If we're just washing our dish and we throw, and there's a little bit of scraps, like after lunch today, there might be a couple of grains of rice or something, and we wash our dish, and then we throw those couple of grains out, and we can do it as a meaningless act in which there's not really any positive potential. But we can say to ourselves, throwing this water, I hope that all the ants or the insects that have this water, or somebody that eats these grains of rice, I hope it will give them good conditions. And then it becomes something that generates positive potential, these seemingly meaningless things. For example, in the meditation hall, we have the fine manner. The monastics are not, or practitioners are not supposed to just kick the cushions around with our feet, but rather we're supposed to move them with our hands, to bend down, to pick them up, to move them with our hands. Why? If we are somebody who's just formal and doesn't understand the deeper meaning, we think, oh, it's just tradition and so on. But actually, what we're doing is we're moving the cushions and we're thinking, somebody's going to sit here. I hope that when they sit, they will sit peacefully. I hope that they'll have a moment of clarity. I hope they'll have a moment of transformation, of liberation. And in that way, when that person sits there, there's that energy already, there's that intention already. It becomes something that's so much positive potential for you, or something that's meaningless. So for me, this is a key teaching of the Buddha, that our intentionality in every moment can turn those meaningless things into moments of a lot of positive potential. Even those gathas that we recite in Plum Village, our tradition, brushing my teeth and rinsing my mouth, I vow that my words will be fragrant, that they'll be able to reach the heart of the other people, which we recite when we're brushing our teeth and so on. They can all be formal things, or they can be very deep and beautiful practices. So this is the invitation of the Buddha. But finally, the final aspect of generosity that we often forget is generosity to ourselves. In fact, the Buddha recommended that we reflect often on our own generosity, reflect on our own merits, our own blessings. We often think of this as selfishness or self-centered. But in the Anguttara Nikaya, Sutra number 11, for those of you who want to look it up, it's called the Mahanama Sutta. The Buddha describes the recollection of the Buddha, the recollection of the Dharma, the recollection of the Sangha. And in fact, in the Theravadan tradition, we'll often chant those three recollections, Itipiso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vijacharana Sampanno, goes on like that. The noble teacher in whom I take refuge is the one, this kind of thing, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Tay added the mindfulness trainings, so we have 4 in the Plum Village tradition. This is already a great step up, and it's much more faithful to the sutra, because the 4th is reflecting on the ways that we've offered, the way we've behaved towards others. And then the 5th is our own good qualities and our own generosity. The Buddha recommended that we should reflect on these recollections, these 5 recollections. Many times, if we're feeling stressed out, tired, we feel down on ourselves, reflect on the qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, our own good qualities and our own generosity, reflecting on those times that we've opened our heart, we've been able to give a gift. Whatever we pay attention to grows stronger in our mind, particularly as we get older. So I want to ask you to reflect on, for the rest of the day, and maybe as we go through this holiday season, what's the greatest gift that we can offer ourselves or offer others during this holiday season? What are the ways that we can send goodwill and kindness to ourselves? And perhaps also thinking of the person or group of people or nation that we've excluded from our heart, who we tend not to bring into our heart, that we behave in an aversive way towards. Maybe that person doesn't fit our ideals. They might be from a different culture. They might eat different things. They might think differently. They might have different behavior. So how can we bring that person also, or that group of people, that situation into our hearts? And this time is also a time when we come to reconcile all the different parts of ourselves, all the different parts of our experience, and also take the opportunity to reconcile with the other person. This would be the greatest gift. There's that joke of that people say, Christmas is a time to forgive and to offer forgiveness. And I feel that this year, so that if any of you would like to come to me to ask for forgiveness, I'm willing to forgive you. This is not really the way. We also, during this time, we can reflect on the ways in which we've also closed down our hearts towards ourselves and towards others. And as we move through this season, we can set the aspiration to be able to transform this tendency over the coming year. And this is more than possible. So I want to wish everybody a very merry thisness and a happy new now. Let us enjoy a sound of the bell.